Welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast, the photo imaging industry's leading news source. Here's your host, Gary Peugeot. The Dead Pixel Society podcast is brought to you by Media Clip, Advertech Printing, and Independent Photo Imagers.
Hello again and welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. I'm your host, Gary Peugeot, and today we're joined by Brandon Pflieger, who's with Capital Growth Partners, and Brandon's coming to us from Alexandria, Virginia. And he's going to talk to us today about growth management and how to run your business more effectively. Hi, Brandon. How are you today?
I'm good, Gary. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I think you're the first kickboxing coach I've ever had on the show. Can you tell me about your journey into business to start, please?
Sure. A long time ago, I started in the big box gym industry and ran, think 100, 1,000 square foot clubs for a while. After COVID hit, I got a little bit run down in the retail space, as I'm sure people can imagine. And so I actually went into the marketing world and ran a marketing firm for a couple of years. And then I just didn't love that. I kept waking up, Gary, and just going, man, I'm not very happy. And so I transitioned back into fitness. We actually got into the franchise space. So we've got a couple kickboxing studios, as you pointed out. I do teach classes every once in a while, so I enjoy a little bit of the workout myself. And now we've got Capital Growth Partners, which is my consulting firm, but done a little bit of everything.
So what drew you to fitness and that sort of thing? Were you always that way, or was it sort of a business opportunity? You see the business side of it. Were you trying to marry your passion with a business? Is that where that came from?
Yeah, no, certainly later in life. I mean, generally speaking, when I first got into the fitness industry, I just get a little deeper. My dad passed away when I was about 18, and that kind of pushed me into fitness. There was a lot of heart problems. There was a lot of, not working out, a lot of fast food in my house, and I just wanted to do something a little differently. So I think initially it was out of fear, frankly. I didn't want that to happen to me. And
Absolutely.
So I got into fitness, enjoyed it. And then when I got out of it, you just start to realize, like, I was in political marketing for a while. I was in corporate marketing, and I just wasn't happy. And I knew that if I married, my fitness passion with my business passion, which I already had some pretty good insight into, I could make some money and have fun doing it. So that's ultimately where I went.
So now you do Capital Growth Partners, which is a consulting for business consulting. When you're talking to someone who says, Brandon, I've got issues, right? My business isn't growing the way I want it to. Can you come in and take a look? What's the first thing you look at?
Yeah, so we have what's called our turnaround blueprint. And the first thing that we do is we initially come in, we look at your people. Almost every situation comes back to the team members that you have surrounding you. So whether you're, one or two employees or whether you're 50, you got to make sure that the people on your team, one, they're in the right seats, and are they performing for you? A lot of times I think small business owners, if you're an empathetic person and you get, really involved with your team and their lives, which is probably a good leadership trait to have, we hold on to people sometimes that just aren't doing the things that we need them to do for us. And so we immediately look at people, and then we move into your systems and processes, your offer. Do people like your product? That's a thing that I run into a lot. Is I find that business owners or the founder, right, they get really excited about their product and they're not listening to what the actual market wants. Right. And so they're kind of ignoring everybody else because they think whatever their shiny product is great. Right. And then ultimately marketing, we were talking a little bit about marketing earlier, but I did run a marketing firm for a couple of years, and I'm sure you see this, but people don't know what they're doing on digital marketing. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but you've got to understand digital marketing. I've actually run into plenty of business owners that go, I don't need that. I've got word of mouth. I've got referrals, which are all great things. But if you're not on social nowadays and using Meta for lead generation, you're going to have a hard time.
Right. So let's start with the people thing. Obviously you've probably talked to different types of business that require different types of people. How long does it take you to assess a staff? Let's say, for example, let's use a typical photo retail, like a 1 hour lab, photo lab, print shop kind of thing. Maybe you have 6 to 8 employees. You've got a very active owner, usually hands-on, they're not usually. And, a lot of times they hire from their customer base, right? They have a customer who comes in and they are, excited about photography, and maybe they're a weekend photographer, maybe they're a wedding photographer, and they want to be in the output side because they're always involved in the industry. They'd rather be, working their day job at a photo lab rather than at Starbucks and shooting weddings on the weekend, right? But maybe that person isn't great at production, right? Or something like that. Because even though it's the industry, it's not the same thing. So, what are some of the things you look at when you go into a business and you're reaching someone that size who maybe is a kind of a niche business?
Yeah, I mean, at that size, I think we can get through things in usually a week, week and a half. It definitely depends on how involved that owner is, but if they are very involved, Gary, you get to see how they interact with their staff pretty quickly, right?
Mhm.
A big thing that I like to look at is I like to look at body language. So I try to jump into those weekly meetings that hopefully you're having with your staff, right? Where you're
Right.
kind of setting
Yeah,
expectations.
yeah, yeah.
That's another problem if you're not, right? But we can get to that later. But I like to look at the interactions that the owner has with their staff. Is the staff kind of clammed up? Are they not talking a lot, or are they
Mm.
open? And is there a lot of ideas flowing?
Right.
I think tone matters a lot. I tell all my clients this, but it's not always what you say, it's how you say it.
Right.
People will forgive you for giving them bad news and having hard conversations if you say it in a way that makes the person across from you feel respected. And I
Mm.
find that is usually not the case. And not always, but usually when you find particularly a business that's failing, there's a culture issue somewhere.
Right.
And a lot of times, and I'm not faulting the business owner for this because I've made this same mistake too. It's all your money on the line. You're
Mm.
stressed. Maybe you're breaking even or you're not making money. Worst case, you're losing money, right? And
Mm.
so, I think that's a very stressful situation. And sometimes we project that onto
Right.
our staff. And I think the thing I have to remind business owners all the time is that you are going to care about your business more than everyone else.
Mhm.
And that's not a bad thing. That
Right.
makes sense. And so, we initially kind of look at the interactions there. I do have one-offs a lot of times with the staff too, just to get the owner away from them and see what's really going on. Particularly, I
Mm.
find the most talkative folks are usually the second in command, right? In larger companies, usually like a COO, and smaller operations, maybe it's your assistant manager or your
Right.
operations manager. They'll tell you what's wrong usually with the business. And if they're pretty sharp, a lot of times they'll tell you some really good stuff that you can then go enact with the owner.
So, have you come across a place where the owner's the problem?
100%. And I smile because I would say usually 70 to 80% of the time, it's actually the owner getting in their own way. A good story is that, I was consulting a small franchisee, and actually in the network of franchisees that I run, Rockbox Fitness. And he was so involved in the business. I mean, we're talking 40, 50 hours, but then he had a general manager, an assistant manager. He had a ton of great trainers, but he was smothering them. He was there all the time. He had empowered this general manager and this assistant manager, who, by the way, he's paying a salary to make decisions and create connections with members and create connections with other staff. But
Mhm.
every time they piped up, he would correct them, or he would say, I would actually do it this way instead.
Now, would he do that in public or private?
Both,
Yeah,
a lot
because
in
the public
private.
thing's a problem.
Yeah. And a lot of times it would happen in these team meetings, right? Or even, I mean, sometimes it would happen in front of members.
Mhm.
And so, kind of the worst case scenario, right in front of your customers. And
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
what we did with him is I gave him a rule. I said, look, I mean, it's not going to hurt you because you're already paying these people. You can only be in the business 20 hours a week.
Hmm.
And he was in the business probably 50 to 60 hours a week.
Right.
And ultimately, he told me when we first connected and we kind of went through outcomes, what he wanted from us. He wanted to be in the business 20, 15 hours a week because he wanted to go do other stuff. And
Right.
so a lot of times it's giving your team enough rope to see how they perform and letting them make decisions maybe that you wouldn't make, and
Mhm.
frankly seeing how they go.
Right.
It's not always, there's a couple different ways to attack a problem, and I think a lot of times as a entrepreneur we think that we're the only one that has the answers.
Right.
But you've hired somebody, you are paying them, a healthy salary, hopefully,
Mhm.
to make decisions on your behalf and to build relationships. And you got to let them do that. You got to get out of the way.
One of the things I think is kind of some people would push back on that concept is you earlier said you're going to care about the business the most, but on the
Mhm.
other hand, you also want your other people to care about that. Now, I think that goes hand in hand with having your team involved in all the metrics, right? Profit and loss and all those other things, because I think that helps get the buy-in. What do you think?
100%. I think if you don't have a good incentive plan for your team members, it's a lot more challenging. So, to your point, I like to see what motivates people.
Mhm.
I have a general manager, for example, that runs one of my studios that he doesn't necessarily get motivated by money. He gets motivated by the time spent with me. So, I actually will spend a lot of time with him.
Mhm.
I'll take him out to lunch. We'll do a nice dinner when we have a really successful month. And that's how I motivate him. Now, other people are motivated by money, right? So
Sure.
I think you need to make sure that there's an incentive plan. And it 100% should be based on, the success of your business. I've seen some pretty funky incentive plans out there. But, for example, if, your business makes X this month, then you're going to give Y to that general manager.
Right.
And everybody kind of shares in the success, right? So
Right.
that's another way to get past that initial, they just don't care as much as I do.
Right.
Because I think, eventually, and usually, to be clear, this probably is later on in business. What we kind of run into and what I see usually is that startup, that first 6 to 12 months. I'm a big believer personally in actually being very hands-on in your business. I
Right.
think that if you're leaving it to somebody else and hoping it goes well, you're in for a rude awakening. So
Right.
I'm a big believer of having a lot of control in that first to 6 to 12 months. But then
Sure.
once you hit that revenue mark and you start to really progress and move forward in your
Mhm.
business, and
Mhm.
hopefully you're trying to expand it, you got to let people do their jobs and you got to step away a little bit.
So let's talk a little bit about the offer, right? I mean, because I imagine
Mhm.
in the fitness world, there's all kinds of different metrics you can use, right? You can have, obese people who just want to get more fit. You may have athletes who are training for competition. You may have people who are, recovering from an injury who are trying to rehabilitate. There's all kinds of different motivation. Now, in the photography industry, there's also a variety of offers, right? In
Mhm.
terms of it may be, you're trying to help people express themselves, decorate their home, or something like that. How do you crystallize a message like that? Because I know in the photography industry, there's almost too many choices. It's
Yep.
too many things to pick. And, what is your insight on when you have a vast array of offers like that? How do you crystallize that offering?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
It's been called the True Crime Podcast for Brands. A case study in corporate fear podcast uncovers that the real killer of iconic brands like Kodak, Blockbuster, and Tower Records was fear. Fear made Kodak bury the digital camera and persuaded Blockbuster to pass on buying Netflix. In a world of constant disruption, fear is the biggest enemy to your success. And knowing why is your best way to avoid becoming fear's next victim. Subscribe to A Case Study in Corporate Fear and learn how others failed so you never do.
Yeah, I think the first step in that, Gary, and what I like to look at with offers, because I see what you were just talking about all the time. I've got, hey, this is my binder full of all these different things that you can purchase from me, right? Or in the fitness world, it's hey, you can buy this one, this one, this one, this one, or this one. Which one do you want to do? And it's a lot of decision making
Right.
that person then has to go make. So my recommendation is to first figure out what is the outcome that the person sitting across the desk or across the Zoom call wants from you. If they need to, we'll put it back to fitness because if there's somebody in front of me that needs to lose 60 pounds over the next 3 months because they've got a wedding coming up, and I tell them, hey, you can do that for one time a week, I'm lying to them, right? I'm
Yeah.
not giving them the best offer. So for someone like that, I maybe give them one offer, maybe two, right? They're not going to get the whole gambit of choices. They're going to get the choices that are ultimately going to help them
Right.
succeed and get the outcome that they need. So I think that's a strong way to, from a sales perspective, get your message in front of somebody and keep it simple because the simpler, in my experience, the better.
Right.
If you've got too many options, you get the old, hey, look, I need to think about this. I need to look at all of this and
Right.
get back to you. Whereas if you say, hey, it's option A or B, Gary, which one do you want to go with? It's a much easier conversation. And then, I think the offer has to be cohesive to the company too. I think a good story I have is in my marketing days, I was pitching NASCAR, and a couple of days before I pitched NASCAR, I asked one of my partners, hey, can you just walk through this pitch with me? It was our first big client that we were, hopefully going to land. And I was pitching the same old stuff we would pitch to $2, $3, $4 million revenue companies. And my partner just said, Brandon, I think that they're going to laugh you out of the room. You got to come up with some other offerings that are going to hit what they need from you. They don't need a small $2 million marketing budget. They need a $50 million marketing budget. So
Right.
sometimes you have to make sure that the offer you put in front of somebody actually resonates with their business too.
Right.
And people sometimes associate value with price. I think a lot of times because we want that revenue, we get
Mm.
in kind of a race to the bottom,
Oh,
and you have to
exactly.
price yourself properly, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. Well, I know you're exactly right, because that is one of the challenges in the photography industry specifically, because there are people who are offering free prints, there's people offering cheap prints. And to be honest, there used to be a time back in the film days where, because of the way the process technology worked, there was a discernible difference between,
Sure.
the cheap, 10-cent prints and the really nice 49-cent prints, right? There you could see the quality differential. I think today with digital with printing, there's less differential between the quality. Ascribing that value is a challenge almost to every business. Because like you said, everyone wants to chase revenue and they think, boy, if I just drop my price 10 cents, I'm going to get X more. So what are some of the ways people can evaluate when that makes sense?
Yeah, I think the first thing, and this is something we recommend to any business, no matter what business we're working with, Gary, is you've got to know your margins. And that means you got to know your P&Ls, and you got to know all that other fancy stuff that I find sometimes business owners don't pay too much attention to. They look at their bank account, is money coming in? Is more money coming in than is going out? I'm in good shape. But you really want to know the margins on your business. So, I imagine in like a print shop, for example, there's different margins on different types of printing.
Right. And different paper, right? I mean, different paper.
Right. 100%. We see it a lot when I used to do some direct mail campaigns when I was in the traditional marketing world, and we did more of that. And, sometimes what we would see is, hey, we can drop our price here, but we're going to cut into our margin and we're going to break even on this deal. And does that make sense? Now, sometimes it might, right? Sometimes it might get you in with that client and you do a great service. They really enjoy what you provide to them, and they put in a deal later that's 10x that. Right. And then we can talk about why that might make sense. But I think a lot of times, to use the phrase I just used, we're in a race to the bottom. We're trying to get the lowest price to that customer possible. And then you look back a month later when you're looking at how you performed that month and you go, wow, I made $3 on that whole situation, or I made a couple $100. Right.
Right.
And if I just stuck to my guns and maybe focused more on my sales process and talked a little bit more about the quality of going with me versus Sally Sue's print shop over there, actually, they would have still bought from you and you would have made 3x the amount of money. Right. So it's not the first place I like to go. I like to talk about, what is our value? What is our sales process? And how can we provide that value to the client without dropping our price?
One of the challenges I think, people retail photo has is because a lot of it is online. Right. There's online ordering where even the, independents have websites. So they may be challenged to convey that quality and differential, right? So let's kind of eke into the marketing part of the conversation and talk about what are some things you can do to kind of convey that when your product may be difficult to discern, especially in an online environment.
Sure. I think first and foremost, you want to look at your SEO. You want to make sure that people can find you and your offerings are very simple. So I like to go back to what we talked about earlier, from like a price sheet standpoint. You want to make sure that people don't have to read too much or go too far into your website to figure out what you're all about. I think there are some businesses that want to keep the price hidden until they have an in-person conversation, maybe like me and you are right now. And then there are some businesses, it makes sense to just put it all out there and turn, right? And so I think the biggest recommendation we have, and I have partners that help with websites when I see a website that's just, struggling a little bit. You got to have a good website. You've got to make sure that, your offerings are front and center, that within, I would say, less than 30 seconds, people know what you do, what you're best at, and how you can help their business grow. So I like to go back to if the front page of your website doesn't help people understand what it is that you do and what outcome you can provide for them, you've already lost, because unfortunately, people's attention spans have gone way down, I think, over the last couple of years with all the social media that's going on. And gosh, I think you used to see 2,000 ads a day. Now you probably see 10 to 20. I don't even know what the stats are now.
Right.
But you got to make sure your offering is really simple and easy to understand on your website.
So how would somebody go through the process? Would they look for, keyword searches or, that sort of thing? Because I think, what you run into, especially when you have an independent who is passionate about their business, right? Let's use
Mhm.
fitness as an example. You're passionate about, kickboxing or whatever, but what
Yep.
people are coming to you for may be something else, but you're really passionate about that piece, right? And in photography it might be, hey, I'm helping people preserve their family memories and I want to share their stuff, but that may not be actually why people are coming to you for that. So
Yeah.
how does an independent business owner kind of struggle with that?
So I would recommend going towards video and optimizing your website for sharing experiences. I loved what you just said, Gary, about, like preserving the family memories. And with us, I always joke about nobody really cares what the workout is. And my staff always looks at me and goes, what? And nobody cares how they're going to lose the 30 pounds. They're going to care that they lose the 30 pounds.
Right.
So they don't care if you throw them on a bike or if you have them punch this bag. We just happen to have kickboxing at our gym, but they really came in today not caring about your fancy equipment, not caring about what the way that they're going to lose weight is. They care that how long is it going to take me and when am I going to see results? So I
Right.
think the same would translate to this business as well, is that you got to make sure you're not getting into the weeds about, the equipment and how shiny, the printers are that you use. You got to really focus on what is the outcome for the customer, and then
Mhm.
how can I convey that I've done that for other people? So I like to use video. I see a ton of websites that don't have any form of video on them at all. And I think that's a huge mistake. People
Right.
consume information through video now. I was
Mhm.
just reading a stat the other day that folks are starting to, in our podcast world, they're starting to watch more podcasts on YouTube and consume more video. And
Yeah.
it's not huge yet, but I imagine it'll still continue to move up, particularly as the big showcases and they cancel their shows and then they start going on podcasts. People are going to want to watch them still, right?
Right.
So video is really a non-starter. It's the thing that I recommend every one of our clients to use.
You always hear that, and the challenge I run into or with that, and again, I do video myself, so I'm not,
Sure.
it's just the challenge of I think there's an ROI time issue with that, right? Everyone says, oh yeah, just do a quickie TikTok, right? But if it's not well done, what is the point, right?
Yep. Yeah, I I struggle with that too, Gary, because I think that sometimes I've had a client before that I've recommended video to, and we were on a pretty specific contract, so I talked to them once a month. And when I came back and talked to them next month, they had gone off and spent $3,000 to $5,000 on a big video shoot, and they had people coming out. And that was my mistake. I said, hey, look, if you want to go through with it, go through with it. These people sound talented, but I'm really looking for something simple, for something that you guys can probably put together on your own. There's a lot of AI, not to use that buzzword, but there is a lot of AI out there that will help you edit your videos and kind of find the strongest points in the video that you
Right.
record, and then pump out something pretty impressive. So
Yeah.
to your point, I think, not necessarily filming a TikTok, but something short, something sweet. For me and my business personally, I like to be very transparent about how we find our clients. Is I do a lot of video, but it's a lot of me sitting right here and talking about, the customers that I work with and how I can help people.
Mhm.
I try not to, make it fancy and have all the background and, I'm not standing next to a Ferrari telling people I'm going to get you one. So it's all about keeping it simple, I think, and you can
Right.
keep your costs down and do that pretty quickly in most cases.
Because I think, in today's AI world, right, to just start heaping on the
Mhm.
buzzwords, right? Let's just
Sure.
go buzzword crazy. But I really do think, though, the way people are going to be succeeding is with the authenticity, right? I mean, yeah,
Mhm.
the AI generated stuff is fun, but it's eye candy. It's not really substantial.
Yep. I definitely agree with you. And I use AI quite a bit for my businesses, but I always go over what that thing spits out. I can tell, by the way, I follow a lot of people on LinkedIn and a lot of other, influencers. And, just based on what I do, I have to kind of build a brand around myself.
Hmm.
And I can tell my AI, who kind of knows me pretty well at this point. I use it a lot. So they know my businesses, they know what it
Mm.
is that I do. They even know my voice a little bit, but you can still see the difference between a post that my AI would put on LinkedIn and the one that I would put on LinkedIn.
Right.
And so, for example, I always recommend, hey, AI is a great way to cut down time. It's going to give you a nice base. And then you
Right.
need to go in there and make it your own and give it your own voice because it's not that good yet. Maybe it will be one day. I don't know. They're saying 2, 3 years and they'll all take over, but I've heard that before.
Yeah.
So it's still a human business at this point, and you
Yeah.
got to make sure you're doing your own thing.
Yeah. Yeah. LinkedIn's become sort of a weird AI dumping ground where people who I never thought of them as thought leaders are suddenly positing these 4 or 5 paragraph dumps on, some sort of topic, and you can just tell it's not their voice.
No, yeah, and you also usually will see. My favorite is when you find somebody doing that, and then you end up catching a video of them maybe talking somewhere, and they can't pump out any of that information that they put on
Right.
LinkedIn,
Right.
and they're super camera shy, and they're not comfortable on a podcast, right? So you can kind of tell when someone's leaning into the AI, and I think that's again, I really like to put videos out. I like to go to conferences and talk to clients because that's how you know that you're getting into bed with somebody that's not just going to take what you're telling them, put it through Chat GPT, and then give you that as your offering.
Right.
Somebody that is actually knows what they're doing and is going to help your business grow.
Right. Yeah, because in the photography industry, where there's actually been kind of a backlash against the AI in a way, because
Mm-hmm.
there's this whole move back towards film, right? Film is now
Oh, okay.
super popular because it's you can screw it up. It's
Yep.
got imperfections. It's got a grain. It has a look, and people can always tell, even if it's being presented digitally on a screen, you can pretty much say, yeah, that was shot with film because it just looks different. In fact, there's a lot of digital technology now to make stuff look like film, right? To kind of
Huh.
copy that look. So I think that is interesting. That sort of the authenticity piece, I think, is important. So if you were to
Yeah.
sum up what I'm kind of getting through the 3 points you talked to, the people, the offer, and the marketing, is
Mhm.
really understand your core as a business owner, and how to make all those things go through.
Yeah, what we like to look at, and again, you've got to make sure before marketing anything, I always like to go backwards and really make sure we've checked all those boxes, right? So, do you have the right people? Do you have systems in place for those people to be successful?
Right.
That's a big one. A lot of times I'll find that business owners do not have sales processes. They've got all this stuff in their head, and they're just like, all right, team, go get it done. And then they
Right.
get frustrated when it's not done how they thought it would be. So, have you put systems and processes in place? And then, yeah, to the point we just talked about, is the offer something that's exciting to customers to either purchase it, whether it's a service offer or if it's a brick and mortar specific, like shoes or pizzas, right? Does it taste good? So you've
Right.
got to make sure that all those things are checked off before, and this is where I come in and I say, hey, your marketing budget's too low. Before you start spending money against marketing, we always make sure all that's taken care of. But yeah, the biggest thing I see, Gary, too, is that you've got these companies, particularly smaller companies, I would say in the like 0 to 2 million range of revenue, and they just don't have the backing of a nice big marketing budget. And to be clear, I'm not asking people. I'll just use fitness as an example. I'll have people that are spending $200 a month on marketing, and they can't understand why their business isn't growing.
Right.
And you've got to spend more in our space. You're talking, probably quadruple to maybe even more than that, $2,000 to $3,000 a month for a small boutique fitness operation.
Right.
And then it scales from there. I used to advise larger companies that we worked with, with NASCAR and some other company names that we worked with, is that you really should be spending about 5 to 10% of your total revenue on marketing if
Okay.
you're in a growth phase. If you're
Okay.
not growing and you just want to kind of hang where you are and you're making good money and you're cool with that, great. Don't spend the money. But if
Mhm.
you want to grow, you got to have a healthy budget to go behind.
Right. That's one of the things I kind of hear from people is like they don't know, what, because sometimes they confuse marketing with advertising, right? And advertising is part of marketing, it's not the whole thing.
Right.
And so, you always hear 3 to 4% should be advertising, but you're saying on top of that, there should be marketing activities, whether it's promotions, whether it's, buy one, get one free, whether it's, PR or social or TikTok or whatever.
Yeah. The advertising, and that probably depends on your industry, but I'll use, some companies that we've worked with on like the home services front and like the brick and mortar, is that your advertising dollars that are going into Meta should probably be about 60 to 70% of your entire marketing budget, because you're getting a lot of leads. And in this space right now, that's where the most leads are coming from. So, if you're going to spend money, let's say your budget in total is $10,000 to keep the money simple. That'd be a pretty big fitness studio, by the way. But let's say the budget's 10,000 to keep the numbers simple. You should probably be spending around 6 or 7,000 of that on your advertising, your digital advertising footprint. And then you've got some left over there for, the events, or maybe sponsoring the local school so that every time moms are driving through the Kiss and Ride, they see your name and they see your giant sign there. There's also a real neglect, I think, of traditional marketing. And people have been moving away from that for a while. And I really have had a lot of success utilizing direct mail in almost all of my businesses. And so I think that's something to look at too. It's not always cheap. And, I think sometimes that we're all trying to save a penny or a nickel there, but you've got to, especially when you're first opening something that's a brick and mortar, you've got to have some direct mail behind it. So that's usually how I look at it. And then on top of that, there's your website and making sure that your SEO is sound. There's PPC campaigns, which is pay per click for Google, which is definitely important. You want people, if they type in boxing, to find your boxing studio. If you're, running a photography business, you want people to be able to find you. So having some PPC behind that, I think, is important too.
So where can people go for more information to learn about Capital Growth Partners and the things you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. So we have a website set up. It's growsmartercgp.com. So again, it's growsmartercgp.com. And all they need to do, I think we've got a pretty good website. Better, because I just talked a lot about it. You'll just go through, you'll click on learn more, and it'll immediately send me a little form fill, and I'll get in contact with you. We like to do a 30-minute discovery call. There's no charge for that. It'll learn a little bit about your business and see if we can help. And if we can, we'll help. If we can't, we'll tell you. We're pretty transparent. So that's where to find us.
Awesome, Brandon. Well, listen, it's great talking to you. I learned a few things, and I appreciate your time and look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Likewise. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you for listening to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. Read more great stories and sign up for the newsletter at www.thedeadpixelssociety.com.